to do this session. This is unfortunately the one aspect of my research that I wish did not have staying power, and yet here we are, and tragedies keep happening either nationally, and then the ripples are felt on campus, or there's local tragedies happening all the time as well. And so it's important that we talk about it and get some good strategies. So, and that's actually why I did this research. This was my own attempt to find agency when September 11 happened back in 2001, and I started thinking, what can I do? I'm just so insignificant and small, and can I help in any way? And as academics, we're going to save the world one paper at a time. So I started doing research on this stuff. And what I found in my initial literature review was that there actually was a body of literature, but it was focused on the administration, the president, the PR team, and so on. And so it was all about having the evacuation plan ready for campus, all the escape routes. It was about getting ahead of the story with the media and coming out with a strong message and so on. And so lots of useful suggestions for that. But nobody was talking about the faculty at the time. And the usual suggestion is to cancel classes when something critical like that happens. And but at some point, students come back, and then what do we do? Can we assume that, we've dealt with whatever we needed to deal while school was closed, and now we just continue on with the curriculum? And maybe yes, maybe no, but what we found out was that there was no guidance whatsoever. And so we wanted to see, A, what people did, and B, did it help in any way? Was there a sense, at least a subjective sense, that it helped? So by the end of this webinar, I wanted everybody to be able to discuss the consequences of tragic situations on people in terms of the biology or the physiology of what happens to us and the consequences on our behavior, as well as our learning and performance in the classroom. And then discuss what we can do. What are our options, and which ones are, where are they on a continuum from more to less effective, and also on another continuum of more to less intense and intensive. So what is basically, how do we conceptualize our role in times of tragedies? So those are my three objectives for the day, and I see actually the last one really playing out in the discussion that we're going to have at the end, after I present the research results. So I'll go through the research results, then I'll do a little mini unit on understanding what's happening in the brain and how it's connected to cognitive, as well as emotional aspects, as well as even developmental aspects, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So in terms of research results, I have two papers out that I did following the 9/11 tragedies. One was a survey that I sent out to instructors, where I collected their reactions to find out, A, what they did in the classroom, B, did it help or did it not help? Did they have a sense of that? And then we did a companion survey, and I should mention that this was done with my colleague, Therese Houston, and asking the students to report on all the classes that they were taking, each one by one, however many they were registered for. For each instructor, talk about what that instructor did or didn't do and how helpful that was. And so then we tried to triangulate this data to see what the results were. You might have and actually start thinking about, what do you think the most common response is that we found, both that our professors told us as well as our students? You can start thinking about that, and I'll tell you in a second. The largest reaction was to actually do nothing, not even mention them. Okay, so that's 38% of the instructors, and that number goes up to 47% in large lectures. A bunch of them, actually, the next big group is to have a class discussion. So we're going from doing nothing to actually doing something that's quite involved. Some people offered, acknowledged that this was, it might be taking over your brain, and so we need to go on, but there will be opportunities to review later, or maybe offer extensions, maybe excuse students if they weren't able to get their homework done, or their quiz, or whatever it was. Asking about families and friends. This was back when I was at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so relatively close to New York. So with a lot of students coming from New York and having families, and actually also some of our distance programs being based in New York, in Wall Street, the finance programs. Some people acknowledge that whatever happened, but there's nothing we can do, is what they said, and so we just need to go on with the material. They mentioned that there were resources and support on campus, such as counseling services. Some of them actually restructured their courses, what they were going to cover, to incorporate what had happened into the curriculum, whether from a historical perspective or from a geopolitical, mechanical, engineering, in terms of the planes crashing, the towers going down, melting, and so on. People mentioned ways that students could help, such as giving blood or sending donations. And a small number had a minute of silence. So those are the reactions that we observed. You can see already that there's a continuum of minute of silence takes nothing to do versus have a class discussion or change your syllabus to incorporate the text into the curriculum, and we'll see what some of those options are. But as with this range of options and of intensity of the reaction, so the professors did them, and then did they go well or not? So we asked professors. We tried to break this down, try to understand if there were any predictors of who was doing what in the classroom. And we had certain hypotheses of variables that might matter. So we were interested in looking at gender. Are women more nurturing and they're doing more in the classroom than men? Are people with a smaller class size having more opportunities to do something, a more targeted intervention? Are people with more years of experience maybe more comfortable and kind of intuitively know what to do, rely on their instincts accumulated over a number of years? None of those were significant. The only two that we found was international faculty did less. Really did not know what to do in the U.S. classroom, in the American culture. And also faculty teaching graduate classes did less as opposed to faculty teaching undergraduate classes. So this is in terms of breaking what they did, their reactions in the classroom down by some covariates. The next question that we had was, did they have a sense that what they did worked or didn't work, or were they confused?
Disappeared.
I'm sorry? Is this okay? So in terms of confusion, we found that international faculty were more confused, and gender was also a variable correlated with confusion, in the sense of, in this case, that male professors were more confused. And when I say confused, this is what I mean. They were confused about what was their role. What's advisable for me to do? Should I be nurturing my students, helping them process this? Should I just cover the content? What exactly is my role? What does the institution expect from me? So that was one level of confusion. The other level of confusion was about what to do. Do I have a sense that a minute of silence works more than having a full an hour-long discussion, or other things, or not doing anything at all? So that's the confusion. And what we found was that the confusion was independent of the type of response. The people who were confused, some people did something, maybe even interesting things, and then like I had no idea if that helped or not at all. And some other people did nothing, and then they second guessed themselves, and they thought, oh, maybe I should have done something, but I don't really know. The students didn't. I'm confused. I don't know. So no lessons learned for what to do in the event of the next time tragedy is happening. So that's interesting. That means we need to think about, because even just going through things once doesn't mean that we know what to do the next time. So for the people who did not mention the attacks, why did they not do that? Well, they were not comfortable, was one big reason. They did not know what would work or not work. They did not know, actually, they were worried about making it worse, even. Some of them, they did not know what their role should be, as I mentioned already. For some of them, they were thinking, here I am grieving myself. I am in shock. I am in no state of helping anybody else. It's all I can do to just, keep teaching chemistry or whatever it is I'm teaching. Um, and then there was a number of people who did nothing with the explicit intentional purpose of saying, I wanted to provide a sense of normalcy. At least in this classroom, in the midst of chaos that's going on in the world, things are going on track. And that feeling itself should be a helpful feeling for the students. Put it another way, if we stop what we're doing and we start doing different things, the terrorists have won, was the sense of these people who did nothing for that reason. So what helped? And by what helped, I mean in a subjective sense of what did the students think helped. And so this is what we know from the students. The students told us that for the professors who did something, anything at all, acknowledge it, address it in whichever small or big ways, most of the students found that very helpful. And they also felt that class then got back on track at the right time. They didn't feel like they started to spend too much time. They feel there was a natural, organic way of talking about things and then getting back on track. Some of the things that were the most helpful were, interestingly, the 1 minute of silence was the thing that most people said was most helpful. Um, Now, here we are in terms of something that costs nothing, literally costs 1 minute of your time, and it's very helpful by 80% of the students who participated. So these are some of the things that we can think about in terms of cost versus yield. Mentioning ways that people can help. People didn't maybe know that there's a fund set up that you can send donations to, and this is the information, and they found it very helpful. The ones who put it into the curriculum also found it very helpful, and the ones who acknowledged and were aware that students were in no way, in no state to process this complex information that was being presented to them, and so made assurances of don't worry, we'll review, we'll offer extensions, and so on and so forth. All of that was helpful. So then what is it? Why? Why? Because it gave students time. It showed understanding. The students said that they felt that the instructors care about them. They didn't sweep it under the rug. And also, there's a learning. They said for some of those things, after our discussions, after our units, we actually learned about these issues and we know more about them. We got a chance to apply concepts to the real world. We got a chance to get involved. How did that happen? Here are just some couple of examples. In statistics, in public policy, there was a lot of talk about racial profiling at the time. And this professor had made them use Bayes' theorem that they had just studied to actually to evaluate the effectiveness of racial profiling, basically to help them calculate the probability that somebody is a terrorist given that they're Muslim, which again is a big discussion in the news these days with refugees. But basically, it gave them a chance to talk about the fact that people think of the opposite case, the probability that somebody is Muslim, given that they are a terrorist, and they confuse the two probabilities, and they're very different from each other. And there's mathematical ways of calculating that. So that's a case of the tools of the discipline helping students gain a sophisticated understanding that holds complexity instead of settling for simplistic answers. And that is why students appreciated things like that. Unit on bioterrorism in biology. Robotics, talking about rescue robots and using this as a problem-solving exercise. You have people trapped in this building. They can't go up because there's the roof. They can't go down because there's a giant hole. What kind of robots do we need for that? And the thing is melting and it's going to collapse in a few hours. So what are given these parameters, then what do we have to work with, and how can we design things that will be effective in that situation? This English professor had told them, you are in a pivotal moment of your life. This is like Pearl Harbor. This is like you're going to go back in your life and remember where you were when this happened. And so journal about this. We're going to journal together. We're going to write. We need to write anyway in this class, so we're still meeting the learning objectives, but we're going to write about this if this helps you process. So those are some ways of incorporating tragedies in the curriculum from the gamut of different disciplines. I think it's also helpful to think about what is unhelpful. Not doing anything was considered the most unhelpful. And this is a quote from one of the students. It would have been nice if at least one of my 5 classes had mentioned it, or saying there's nothing we can do, or even saying, I know how you feel, especially for students who had, I don't think anybody lost anybody. I think we lost a couple alumni only. But there were people who were still missing at that time. And so to say, I know how you feel to somebody who is, they don't know where their relatives are, they felt it was condescending and no, you do not know how I feel, so do not even go there. I want to spend some time on this one because this is counterintuitive. One would think that discussions would be helpful to have a discussion about what happened and incorporating issues that we talked about in the classroom. But actually, students were split 50-50, exactly 50-50, in terms of whether it was helpful or unhelpful. They felt it was inappropriate for certain classes, but not for others. They felt they went on for too long, and they also felt that they just got people riled up and nothing more. And actually, I'm going to go back to that. Part of that was basically that it riled up people on different sides of the situation. Maybe people thinking, oh, we should just, round up all the immigrants and send them home. And then you have, immigrants or sons of immigrants in the classroom, and they get offended, and now it's a class that has a conflict that the instructor does not know how to deal with. So that's part of why, that's what aroused emotions means. From a physiological perspective, this is all consistent with what we know happens during traumatic events. Oxytocin goes up, and so that means the desire to help others, to affiliate, goes up. People wanting to get involved, people wanting to just be with each other. Activity in the amygdala increases and hippocampus and prefrontal cortex decreases, which means that fear and anxiety go up, emotional memory goes up, remembering where you were when you heard the news, that kind of stuff. But actually, the memory for integrated information, so the ability to process complex information the way we do every day in our courses, that goes down. The planning, the problem solving goes down, which means the reliance on standard practice goes up. For instance, people talking about, I was driving and I was going over here to the doctor, but instead I ended up coming to school because that's where I always drive. That went up in those days, we heard. So people just rely on what's familiar, and they have a difficult time thinking something new, something different, something outside the box. From a developmental perspective, and I'm not going to get into this, we have all these levels of maturity, but what we found is that people can regress to dualism, the black and white thinking about the world. And this is a quote from Perry that really highlights this idea of retreating into simplistic ways of thinking. It's these people, they're bad, let's just get rid of those people. It's Muslims these days again, but it was people with trench coats when Columbine happened, and it was people with mental health issues when Virginia Tech happened, and so on and so forth. We look for the bad guy, we look for the scapegoat, and we try to make those decisions, those discussions all about that. So these are some resources, ground rules for discussions, the stuff that we actually already know happens or already know works for any kind of discussions, works well for these other kinds of discussions if you're getting into that. If that's a choice that you or the faculty you work with, you want to advise them to. So this is all I have at this point, and I really want to open it up for questions from everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Michele. If you have a question, you may either type it into the chat or you can raise your hand. You should see a little hand icon, and if you click on that, we can give you the microphone. And as we're waiting for those to come in, Michele, I think one of the really cool things that I have learned is that doing something, anything, is better than nothing at all. Because, I mean, I remember when I was teaching on September 11th, it was my very first class I'd ever taught, and it was during that class that the attacks were happening. And, I mean, we were as clueless as to what to do as the students were, and we all just kind of sat together and watched. But honestly, I have no memory of what I did the next time we met. I do remember some of my instructors having, trying to open discussions, but no one really knew what to say or do, and it was a little awkward. But I guess still the message is doing something and acknowledging it is better than nothing.
That is certainly one of the takeaways, absolutely, for me.
Michele, why do you think there was a difference between how instructors of graduate students reacted in relation to undergraduate?
I think there was a sense of I'm treating graduate students as adults. They should be able to process this on their own.
Yeah.
Which may or may not be the case. Think about who your graduate students are. Maybe they're international. Maybe they're here all alone by themselves. We've seen the desire to affiliate goes up. They want to be with their dears, and there's nobody there. So they're suffering more than other people who can just make a phone call home or go home to whoever. Some of them might be targets themselves. If you have graduate students from Muslim nations, for instance, in that particular case, and people that are going, to the store and people are yelling at them, which are stories that we heard during our research. So it's not about being an adult, and it's also not about we can't assume that we know just how heavy that burden is for some people, because for people who are not similar to us, don't look like us, don't think like us, we don't know how they're reacting to that.
It's funny. That was one thing that I noticed too, because I kind of would have expected it to be the opposite, that in graduate classes they're usually smaller. We often think of our grad students as colleagues, as more, I don't know. So I was kind of surprised that there wasn't more discussion in the graduate classes.
Mm. And there might have been, and remember, this is a statistical finding. It doesn't mean that there was any discussion. It was less than the undergraduate. It might also be that in the undergraduate courses, you have a flood of students asking for extensions. Oh, this weekend I had to go home and be with my family. I'm sorry, and so one person says it, and then me too, me too, me too, and then like, okay, fine, let's talk about this. Who needs an extension? Okay, let's reschedule the test. Blah blah blah. It might be that it was student driven even in undergraduate courses. That I do not know. We didn't ask that, so I can't get at that.